Ilya awoke rather slowly. She felt as though she had a strange dream last night, weird people appearing out of nowhere, an odd talking stick, ghosts, and not tarot cards. Thankfully such a thing was impossible. "Good morning, Ilya-chan," a high-pitched voice shouted out. Weird. Ilya thought for a second that voice sounded like that weird stick from last night. "What are you still doing in bed, Ilya-chan?" The voice inquired. "Don't you know how important it is for magical girls to wake up bright and early?" Ilya's eyes snapped open to see the star-shaped object with wings and a long handle from last night dancing in front of her. "Oh." She rather dumbly muttered, "It wasn't a dream." "Ah. Is Ilya-chan dreaming of me already? That isn't good. Your dreams should be occupied by your precious Oni-ich. Wah!" Ilya screamed and reached out, grabbing the stick before it could say anything else. "Quiet. I told you it isn't like that." "Oh ho." Ruby spoke in a knowing tone. "You sure were blushing a lot when I dash." "Ah. Ilya. What are you screaming about?" Sela asked as she burst through the door, a slightly look of concern in her eyes. Ruby instantly hid behind Ilya to avoid being seen. "And nothing," Ilya shouted. When Sela gave her a look, she shifted uncomfortably before thinking of a quick lie. "I had a nightmare." Sela stared at Ilya for what seemed like an eternity before sighing. "Well, I guess it can't be helped." She looked back up and gave a small smile. "I'll be making breakfast soon. Get ready and come down." "Why yes, Sela." Ilya nodded and wide-eyed until Sela left the room before sighing in relief. She then remembered something from last night. "Archer?" Ilya spoke through the mental link. "Yes, master?" The reply was instant. "Are you still in the room?" She really didn't want to get changed while the ghost was still in the room with her. "Your dignity is intact, master. I'm currently on your roof." "Oh." She thought to herself before realizing something. "Were you out there all night?" "Yes." "Aren't you cold?" "Master, your concern is unwarranted. I do not get cold while in spirit form." "That's a relief." She smiled slightly. She didn't like the idea of Archer staying outside all night, but she couldn't exactly have him sleeping in the house. "Are you going to stay in ghost mode all day?" "Unless you ask of me otherwise, master." Ruby came out from behind Ilya. "Oho? Why are we so silent now? Thinking of sure dash." "No." Ilya panicked. "I was talking to Archer." "Oh." Ruby seemed to slump. "Why talk to Satan when you have a perfectly good magical wand to talk to?" Ilya narrowed her eyes because she paused. Why did she seem to prefer talking to Archer? There was just something about her that made her feel at ease. "He's reliable," she went with. She'd only known him for at most an hour, but he seemed to be someone who would help her the most through this crazy period in her life. "My poor Ilya-chan." Ruby sighed dramatically. "She's been bewitched by the devil." "He's not actually Satan." Ilya pouted. "Get out or turn around." She got out of bed. "I need to get changed." "You know I've already seen you naked." Ruby spoke in a monotone voice. Ilya said nothing. She went bright red and threw a pillow at the mystic code while her eyes began to tear up. Archer had been on the roof until the moment he and Ilya finished talking. However, he immediately moved when their conversation ended. He had something to check. This wasn't the house he grew up in, but it was small enough that navigating it was easy. He came into the main room to find a homunculus, Lacerit, lounging about on a sofa. Archer merely raised an eyebrow at the display. The Einsburns were certainly capable alchemists, but he was fairly certain that they wouldn't waste resources to create a couch potato. However, he didn't care enough to worry about it. The object of his investigation was here. EMIYA Shiro, the fool himself. Currently arguing with Sela about who got to make breakfast, it seemed Shiro was losing the argument. Rather tragically too, if his dejected face was any indication, as he was shooed out of the kitchen. "It's not your place to make food, Shiro." Sela narrowed her eyes. "Your mother and father entrusted Liz and myself with such duties. But. Shiro made to complain, but another glare from the maid silenced him. Mother and a father? Archer's thought process ground to a halt. He watched as Shiro walked past, mumbling under his breath, "At least the old man lets me cook once in a while." If Archer were visible, his eyes would have been wide enough to be mistaken for dinner plates. The way in which his younger self spoke made it sound as though Kiritsugu was still alive. And a mother? He would have to assume that was Ilya's mother. He never met or had heard of her, but that wasn't the priority right now. Kiritsugu was alive. But if he's alive, Archer thought to himself, slowly coming to a realization, then does the fool not? He stared at Shiro. This one looked like some mindless idiot. Nothing new there. But the way he held himself, the lack of stubbornness that he had in his own youth. The fact Kiritsugu was still alive. Then I'll become one for you. A young voice spoke in his mind, the cursed words which defined his whole existence were booming. Just leave it to me, your dream. Archer emptied his mind. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. No. He dismissed whatever thoughts he had. He still may have that stupid idea in his head. Maybe Kiritsugu had mentioned it in passing. Or maybe Shiro saw the same smile he did and lived his whole life wanting to smile like that. It didn't matter. If EMIYA Shiro at any point showed the makings of a hero of justice, then Archer would be sure to stomp it out before that curse could take root in the world. But if he doesn't have the dream? Archer shook his head. Even if he didn't have the dream, that wasn't important right now. He still had an objective aside from dealing with this idiot. These class cards, the sooner they were dealt with, the sooner he could focus on his more pressing objective. Archer watched as Ilya came down in her school uniform and sat at the table as Sela began serving breakfast. Archer watched them all eat. They looked normal. Just a regular family eating breakfast. Archer didn't know what to feel. His entire life before becoming a counter-guardian was still vague, but he never recalled anything so mundane as this. Looking at this made him feel sick. It reminded him of what he threw away to pursue that pathetic goal of his. He left the house. He couldn't stomach this anymore. He would need to wait to check if Shiro knew magecraft before he rendered final judgment. He would ask Ilya if he ever exhibited any signs of such a dream and observe him for any type of magecraft usage. Some idiot cannibalizing his nerves wouldn't really hide that well. If EMIYA Shiro went around helping people like he always did, then he'd probably use it at some point to help someone. If Shiro knew magecraft, then Archer would have to deal with that. If he didn't, then Archer left the room. He returned to observing the rest of the town. This was all wrong. No taiga, no grail war, Kiritsugu being alive. A family. What a cruel joke. Archer couldn't even laugh at his own bitterness. Archer, are you still following me? Ilya asked as she went to her next lesson. It had been a few hours since she left for school and she hadn't heard him say anything since their conversation this morning. Yes, I can leave if you want. Archer replied. There was something about his voice which sounded tired. Ilya decided that she didn't like that voice. Is something wrong, Archer? Ilya was slightly worried. He would normally have some tone on the verge of making a joke, but right now he wasn't really showing any emotion. Archer was silent for a while before speaking up again. What can you tell me about your family? Ilya stopped, and if Archer were visible she would have looked at him in confusion. Why do you want to know? Simple curiosity about my master. Something about the way he said that, Ilya felt like it wasn't simply curiosity but didn't comment. Mama and Papa spend most of their time overseas doing work, so that leaves Sela and Liz to take care of Onyai-chan and myself. Ilya gave a small smile. Onyai-chan and Sela often argue about who gets to do the housework, and Liz spends most of her time lounging about the house. And your mother and father? Mama is very involved, she chuckled to herself. She spends most of her time hounding Shiro for grandkids. That's Onyai-chan, by the way. And when Papa comes home he takes me to the forest to play walnut. Walnut? Archer inquired. there was a hint on intrigue in his tone. We go about the forest and compete for who can spot the most walnut buds. I'll beat him one day though. Archer chuckled over the link before speaking again. What about Shiro? There was a slight edge in the question which Ilya wasn't paying attention enough to make out. Onii-chan's very kind, he always wants to help people, he's also very good at archery. They tried to make him captain of the club but he turned it down. He's always been a bit shy about being in the limelight. Sounds like he's your hero or something. Mama sometimes says that Shiro reminds her of Papa when he was younger. Ilya's smile was practically beaming at this point. What, like being a hero or something? Archer's voice was almost razor sharp. Ilya was too busy thinking of her family. Ilya made a startled noise in her mind before replying, no, Shiro says he's just fine with helping people if they need it. I see. Archer's response sounded somewhat relieved. Ilya, however, was too busy thinking about her brother to notice that. Archer was quiet for a few more moments before speaking again. Just fine helping people, eh? Archer? Ilya made to ask if something was wrong, but Archer cut her off. Sounds like you have a very loving family. Yeah. They're great. Ilya almost said that out loud. I'll let you return to your business. I think you're about to be late to your next lesson. Ilya could feel the smirk over the mental link before she looked at the clock on the wall. Ah. Shoot, I really will be late. Ilya cried out before sprinting down the hall. Archer watched her run away without an expression on his face. Well. Archer thought to himself, his one chance to remove the curse of EMIYA Shiro and his foolish ideals. He gets the wrong Shiro. Not only that, he gets the Shiro who wasn't burnt away in the aftermath of the Fourth Grail War, who didn't walk through that hell, never saw that smile on Kiritsugu's face as he was saved. Wasn't handed down that curse by his father. No. It's an EMIYA Shiro with a normal life, a loving family. A future which didn't involve dying alone and making a deal to become a contracted butcher in the afterlife. What rotten luck I have. Archer bitterly remarked. He meant it too. There was no sarcasm in the comment. He didn't care to be here longer than he had to. He would help Ilya with the cards and then leave. Return to his duty as a cleaner and leave the girl and his alternate younger self to their lives. No need for this cleaner to spoil whatever happiness this version of himself had found. EMIYA Shiro wasn't going to become a hero of justice. EMIYA Shiro didn't even know magecraft. If Archer's observations of him throughout the day were any indication, he didn't care what this version of himself did. He found happiness through other means beyond some broken wish to make sure that everyone was saved. Archer didn't even need to life a finger. There was no chance of counter Guardian EMIYA being created. In the same token, Archer had no way of releasing himself from his contract. Killing this Shiro wouldn't erase him from existence, it would just be meaningless. Still, EMIYA had waited one eternity to be sent back to the Fifth Holy Grail War to kill his foolish younger self. What was one more? The rest of the school day passed without incident. Archer felt somewhat relieved that the girl's life was mundane enough to not require his presence. His master was just a 10-year-old girl. Nothing more, nothing less. It did, however, make him hate the sentient mystic code a little more, dragging this little girl into the moonlit world. To walk as a magus was to walk the path of death. Most certainly something a 10-year-old child was not prepared to do, however she was still an Einsborn. Kiritsugu might still be a magus killer, so it wasn't like she would be unprotected. It was just the wrong sort of environment for her innocent mentality. Hey, Ruby. Ilya spoke to the mystic code in her bag. Teach me how to use magic. Archer frowned. It deepened when the mystic code responded, yeah, I'll do that. Master, I would recommend you not do that. Archer spoke and Ilya frowned slightly. Why? She asked out loud. Are you talking to Devil-san again, Ilya-chan? Ruby asked. That mocking tone in her voice was making Archer consider seeing if Rule Breaker would actually destroy the mystic code. Yeah. She nodded her head. He says I shouldn't learn magic. That's because he's Satan. He doesn't want you to learn magic to protect yourself from his evil. Ruby exclaimed. Archer assumed there was some low-level hypnosis spell going on considering no one seemed to notice the shouting stick. He's not. Ilya sighed as she reached her locker. I just figured that if I'm in this situation I may as well enjoy it. See Satan. Ilya-chan rejects your evil. Ruby made a big show of pride in making exaggerated movements. I won't stop you from learning Magecraft Master, but I'd rather I teach you than this thing. Archer reluctantly spoke. If she was going to be adamant on learning, he could at least teach her what he knew before she made one of the mistakes of his youth. Thanks, Archer. Ilya replied to him before turning back to Ruby as she opened her locker. Archer said he'd help, so you and him see him. She froze as soon as she looked in her locker. There on her shoes was a pink envelope. She reached in and picked it up, a slightly questioning look on her face. What is this? Oh. Is that what I think it is? Ruby flew out of Ilya's bag and danced in front of the envelope. What do you? Ilya began before her eyes widened and her cheeks flushed. And no way. Yes way. Ruby rapidly floated up and down to simulate nodding. It's a love you know what. She flew into the girl's bright red face. Come on Ilya-chan. Open it up and read it. See, calm down, Ruby. Ilya nervously began as she went to open the envelope. We need to stay calm in these situations. She slowly drew the letter out of the envelope. Archer leaned over to read it alongside the two. Bring Archer and come to the high school courtyard at midnight, otherwise I'll come get you. Tosaka Rin. Archer would have raised an eyebrow if he were visible. Try not to feel so down, Master, I'm sure they're next time. Archer tried in vain to comfort the sullen girl, whose face looked lifeless. Shall we go home, Ilya-san? Ruby spoke, her usual quirkiness replaced with a tone of disappointment. Yeah. Ilya's voice was as depressed as her face. Ruby tried to cheer her up by putting more life into her tone and speaking again. Always be positive. Yeah. Archer figured he would have to talk with Rin about how to deliver news in a way which didn't play with a young girl's heart. Well, it's time to teach you magic. Ruby danced about. Archer materialized and sat cross-legged on the floor. Ilya had a look of pure innocence on her face as she clapped. Archer had a sneaking suspicion this was another scam. Archer? Do you want to go first? Ilya turned to him. It's fine, Master. Archer waved her off. Despite this thing's personality dash. Hey! Ruby called out. It's still a high-quality mystic code created by a true magician. It might teach you better than I. See, Ilya-chan? Even Satan here dash. Oi. Recognizes my genius. Ilya said nothing as the two traded insults. In that case, Ruby, what will you teach me first? Let's see. Ruby used one of her limbs to adopt a thinking pose. First we shall teach you how to use your weapon properly. Smart. Archer thought, although he couldn't shake the feeling something was going to go wrong here. Ilya-chan. Please do a twirl, place your fingers on your cheeks and smile. Ha? Ilya looked puzzled. Why? A magical girl must do that in order to use her weapon. Ruby said in a knowing tone. Archer was already staring at the stick in confusion now. Give it a try. Ilya did a small twirl and gave an awkward smile. I'll like this? Yes. Very nice, very nice. Ruby cheered and twirled on the spot. Stop. Archer brought their attention over to him. He was sitting down with his hand almost surgically attacked to his face in a classic facepalm. Just stop. Eh? Ilya looked surprised and tilted her head. What's wrong, Archer? Archer looked up and gave a small look of pity at Ilya before rounding a glare at Ruby. You're a consistent source of disappointment, aren't you? What does he mean, Ruby? Ilya turned to the mystic code. Don't listen to him, Ilya-chan. You were doing it perfectly. She was embarrassing herself. Perfectly, you mean? Archer scowled as he stood up. If you aren't going to teach her magecraft properly, then I will. Why, you mean I wasn't doing magic? EMIYA looked slightly betrayed and a little embarrassed. No. You weren't. Archer sighed before looking at her again. Magecraft requires the use of magical circuits. I felt that you had the potential to have a surplus of magical energy, but I don't know how many circuits you have. So you can actually teach me magic? EMIYA asked with a hopeful expression. Archer winced and turned away. I was only a third-rate magus in life. He eventually spoke out. Ha! The devil is a chump. Ruby cheered from the side but went silent when Archer glared at her. I can. Archer hesitantly said. I'll need to see how many circuits you have. He extended a hand. If you would give me your arm. EMIYA leant over her arm. Archer gripped it gently as if it were a piece of glass before placing his other hand on the limb. You'll feel a slightly tingling sensation, he spoke before whispering just under his breath. Trace on. EMIYA widened her eyes and winced slightly as a bright pattern glowed over her limb and up her arm all over her body. Archer's eyes widened slightly before he took his hand away. It seems I was right about your aptitude as a master. He looked at her with a serious expression. I'd say at least 70% of your body have magic circuits running through it. W8, what? Ruby made a noise of surprise and EMIYA looked between the pair in confusion. What does that mean? It means, you're a first-class mage. However, some of your circuits have begun to degrade slightly. They've never been used before, so when you open them it's going to feel a little strange. Archer shrugged. We won't be doing that tonight though. Ha? EMIYA titled her head in confusion. Why? Because it's a very exhausting process. After opening them you'll be out for at least a day. He then made a thoughtful expression. Maybe more, considering how many circuits you have. Either way, even without Ruby you'll have tremendous amounts of magical energy. So when can I open my circuits? She looked at him with a hopeful expression. That isn't something I can really teach you. EMIYA tilted her head slightly. Why? My way of doing it when I was younger was stupid. Very, very stupid. I never learned the proper way of doing it. You'll have to visualize your circuits and then think of a trigger to activate them. Rin or the Mystic Code would be better for the actual starting process. Trigger? The confusion on her face was obvious. Yes, when I activate my circuits I think of the hammer of a gun firing, but whatever works best for you. His face turned serious. However, to be magus is very dangerous. How so? EMIYA's face turned slightly worried. Most magus will find their own experiments dangerous to them. There's also the possibility of less than savory magi. To be a magus is to invite danger. He then glared at Ruby, which is why the idea that this thing dragging you into the moonlit world doesn't quite sit well with me. He then scowled rather heavily, and making her do embarrassing poses is not magecraft. What are you talking about? Ruby huffed. A magical girl's cuteness is her best weapon. Besides, she doesn't need to learn magic if she had me. Archer merely raised an eyebrow. And if she loses you? There was a telling silence before Archer sighed and returned his attention to EMIYA. Regardless, the topic of magecraft would be best discussed with someone like Rin. She is still a better magus than I, although if you still decide on opening your circuits I would be able to teach you some basic spells. EMIYA looked slightly nervous after Archer finishes before she spoke again. We'll wait, shall we? Archer gave her a small smile. Yeah. We'll wait, he said before turning back to Ruby. What kind of mystic code made by Zelrich can't teach magecraft? I can teach it. It's just with me she doesn't need it. Archer scoffed. Regardless, I'll be here until this mess is sorted. He pointed at Ruby. And the second it is, you'll be going back with Rin. I will sever that contract. Why, your threats don't scare me, Ruby proclaimed. Her shaking, however, wasn't very convincing. Archer shook his head before looking at the clock next to EMIYA's bed. We have a few hours before Rin wanted us there. He turned back to EMIYA. Have any idea how to pass the time, master? Ilya adopted a thoughtful expression before her eyes widened and she smiled. I know. Tell me about yourself, Archer. Archer froze. He didn't let his frown show. I'm sorry, Master. Archer shook his head. It seems my unusual summoning has robbed me of most of my memories. I can't tell you much about my life before becoming a heroic spirit. He shrugged. Can't even remember my name. That's. Ilya looked at Archer with pity. Really sad, Archer. It's fine, Master. Archer shook his head slightly. A memory or name isn't necessary for completing my objective. Still. Ilya didn't look convinced. Archer gave her a small smile. It's fine, really, Master. Ilya went to speak again before she let out a little laugh at something. Archer merely raised an eyebrow. Something about me being an amnesiac amuses you, Master, he smirked as she stuttered before she waved him off frantically. And no. It's just the way you were trying to tell me everything is okay. You reminded me of Onii-chan when he doesn't want to cause people trouble. Archer's face remained deceptively blank after that comment before he spoke in an emotionless voice. I'll return to spirit form until you need me, Master. Get some rest. Without waiting for a reply, he vanished into thin air. Rude. Ruby spoke up honestly. Ilya-chan. You're better off not associating with evil people. Ilya frowned. Archer's not evil. He's just really serious. Before her face adopted a more somber tone. Still, it's kind of sad he can't remember his own name. She then widened her eyes. That's it. What's it, Ilya-chan? Ruby tilted her body to indicate confusion. Archer said that card is part of his power as a historical figure, right? So we'll have Rin help us find out Archer's name. Then we can call him something else. As expected of Ilya-chan. She's so nice even to Mr. Grumpy. Ruby cheered slightly. We'll keep it a secret to surprise Archer. She smiled. Imagine how happy he'll be when we tell him what his name is. It was close to midnight when Ilya, Ruby and Archer left the house and ventured off in the direction of the school. Archer maintained spirit form but never strayed far from Ilya. Letting a young girl wander the streets unsupervised was a terrible idea in his books. They arrived in the court. Find Rin already waiting. She was in a casual outfit with a light gray hoodie and a black skirt. She turned to them. Ah, you're here then looked around. I assume Archer is nearby? Said servant materialized after she said that. Yes, now I assume this is important if it required both my master and myself, he said with a raised eyebrow. Rin nodded. But first, you'll probably want to transform, Ilya. Ilya nodded and slowly dragged herself away from the pair. Yeah. Both Rin and Archer looked as she disappeared into a nearby outhouse. There was a quick flash of light before she walked back out. Why did you leave to get changed? Rin asked. Ilya flushed. Because it's embarrassing. Archer said nothing as he scratched his cheek and Rin smiled knowingly before shaking her head. Anyway, we'll start collecting class cards tonight. I assume it has something to do with the magical disturbance just a few feet from us. Archer said as he gestured to the seemingly empty courtyard. Ilya looked over the nothing being pointed at before looking back at Rin, who was busy nodding at Archer's statement. Ilya began. There's nothing there though. Yes. Rin nodded. Nothing in this world anyway. Archer nodded his head. I wondered why it was called a kaleidostic. He turned to Ruby and raised an eyebrow. Some sort of enclosed mirror dimension? Rin nodded before turning to Ilya. Are you ready? When Ilya nodded and adopted as serious an expression as she could, give the circumstances, Rin turned to Ruby. Ready? Yes. Ruby cheered before the trio were engulfed in a bubble of magic. Adding imaginary numerical axis to the fifth instrumental variable. The space they occupied began to reflect. Archer imagined this was some scaled-down version of second magic. He'd never seen it before, so it was certainly a unique experience preparing inversion. Confirming existence of multiple spaces. Fixation of center coordinates complete. Forming reflective path within radius of 2 meters, a pattern formed beneath their feet performing partial inversion of mirror world connection. What are you doing? Ilya looked around in confusion. Rin calmly replied, "We're going to where the cards are found." A world where the cards are found? She froze when she looked around and saw her surroundings being reflected. The ground reflected the surface and the sky was split into multiple mirrors. Rin continued, opposing mirrors result in an infinite number of reflections. If we make our world one of those reflections, then this world would become the world of the mirror surface itself. The mirror world is where the cards are found. Coordinates stable. Ruby spoke with a cheer. Transportation complete. Archer made to speak before his expression turned serious. He fixed a stare in front of him. He gripped Ilya and pushed her behind him. Archer? What are you dash? Stay behind me, master. He spoke with finality which Ilya hadn't witnessed. She looked ahead and her eyes went wide. A dark cloud began to manifest a few meters from them. Rin. Archer spoke with a serious tone. It's as the reports confirmed. Rin didn't reply to him. The class card is materializing. Materializing? Archer raised his brows. You mean a servant is coming here? Why, you mean there's more to cards than simply collecting them? Ilya was shaking as the black cloud began to grow. I'm afraid so. Rin replied, you'll have to defeat that thing to collect its card. A female figure with a single eye on its forehead and long purple hair clawed its way out of the cloud. Archer immediately got in front of the pair. Why didn't you mention there'd be servants? He didn't look back at Rin, his hands already outstretched to project his weapons. Huh? Rin looked genuinely confused. I didn't mention that? No. Ilya shouted, eyes wide with clear terror on her face. Archer scowled. Great, sending children to fight heroic spirits. I'm not even surprised. Hey, what's that supposed to mean? Rin shouted, slightly offended. When the servant jumped, Archer turned around and grabbed Ilya and jumped away while Rin did the same. The corrupted servant crashed into the ground where the trio last stood, kicking up a large cloud of dust and small portions of debris. Stay behind me, master. Archer turned back around, Kancho and Bakuya forming in his hands. He held them up just in time to block a spiked chain aimed at his chest. He scanned the weapons, eyes widening as he figured out their owner. He kicked the servant away before shouting to the other two, it's Medusa. Don't let her use her eyes. Archer was somewhat thankful though. Good news is that she didn't seem to be as strong as a regular servant. She also seemed to lack her complete wits, simply working off brute strength and what little she could remember of her combat training. He went of the offensive. She narrowly dodged the strike aimed for her neck and held up the spike to block the one aimed at her abdomen. The impact staggered her slightly while Archer continued the offensive. Ilya was watching him go toe-to-toe with the weird thing when she heard Rin shout, what are you waiting for? Help him. Yeah. Ilya turned back to Rin, why you want me to attack that? It'll be fine, Ilya-chan. Ruby spoke, besides we can't let Archer do the work of a magical girl. Are you sure? Ilya raised a nervous eyebrow, I think he's doing fine dash. She looked up just in time to see Archer get drop-kicked across a field and land in an explosion of dust. She's taking him more seriously now, seems Archer wasn't expecting that burst of speed. Ruby said in a more serious tone of voice before going back to her chair, see, Ilya-chan? This is where a magical girl comes to the rescue. Ilya growled, Mao. I don't care anymore. She swung the stick and released a beam of light. The servant, still focused on Archer, didn't see the beam until it hit her. The explosion knocking her away. Ilya stared wide-eyed at the display as Archer jumped back out of the cloud of dust. I would tell you it's a servant's job to fight. Archer shouted over to her, his face looking slightly cross before it turned a little softer, but I suppose you aren't as incapable as most masters. Ilya tilted her head in confusion. Nice work, Ilya. Rin shouted over from behind a bush, now support Archer and keep throwing mana attacks. Wow. Ilya was busy staring at Ruby, I can shoot this kind of stuff? Master. Archer's call brought her out of her trance. she looked up to see a spike racing towards her chest. EMIYA cried out in shock and dove to the side, the spike impacting the dirt behind her and creating a small blast. "Keep your focus, Master," Archer shouted as he jumped back to EMIYA's side. "Why yeah." EMIYA was still slightly shaken from her near-death experience. "I can engage her at close range. I'll stagger her enough for you to use your mana blasts." "Alright." She shook herself out of her stupor and refocused on the servant as it withdrew its chain back. Archer charged forward at the same time as the servant. They clashed with a loud clang as blades met chains. Archer scowled. The servant was stronger than before. It still wasn't close enough to a full servant, but it was enough to be a bigger hassle than it was previously. Archer removed Concho from the chain and went for the head. Ryder tilted her head to the side to avoid the blade and at the same time repositioned the spike to block Bakuya while the chain wrapped around Archer's arm. Archer however smirked. He ducked down and swept Ryder's legs out from under her. While she was in the air he kicked up at her side. She was sent skyward where he then called out to EMIYA, "Now, Master." "Alright. Ruby." EMIYA shouted back. Seconds later Archer saw a beam of light strike Ryder. Hand still caught in the chain, he gripped it and pulled downwards. Ryder was sent crashing into the ground, a rather sizable cloud of dust kicked up by the impact. The chain went lax and Archer shook it off. "Good work, Master," Archer called back, hearing a small cheer from EMIYA. Their celebration was short-lived however. When the smoke began clearing, Archer's eyes widened. Ryder made a magical symbol out of her blood. "That's..." Rin shouted out. Archer already knew what it was though. Damn! He could charge her, she hadn't yet. Belro dash she began and Archer instantly raced backwards to where his master and Rin were. His only hope was that the noble phantasm was also degraded. If he could block it, then he could strike while she was weakened. "Stay behind me," he grabbed the pair of them while turning around and holding a hand out. "Lancer, include." He heard a hushed whisper behind him. He turned his head slightly to see another young girl, around EMIYA's age with short black hair, wearing a strange blue version of EMIYA's outfit. What caught his attention though, was the blood-red spear she was holding. Gibalg, the spear of Siyu Chulian. Evidently these class cards seem to mirror the powers of the servants from his Holy Grail War, so far anyway. The girl rushed forwards at impressive speeds towards Ryder. "Gi." She drew the spear back and Ryder made an expression of surprise. Balg, the lance was thrust forward and through Ryder's chest. The servant sputtered slightly before collapsing, her body disappearing into motes of light, leaving only a card titled Ryder. "Lancer, uninclude." The girl spoke again, a detached emotionless voice. "Target defeated." She walked forwards and picked up the floating card. "Class card Ryder has been collected." Archer raised an eyebrow as the girl turned around. She was definitely EMIYA's age. It's never-ending surprises, isn't it? Archer sighed to himself.